Connie.
I just want to share with you that a few years ago, remember then we as, if I may use the race now, I was the first colored teacher that was permanent at my school. And I had 15 white learners in my class. And then there were staff members, mostly white. And yes, I was a racist. I had to first realize that I am a racist. And remember the colored communities, you don't feel like a racist, but you talk about it. But when I experienced it myself as a person, when the other colored teachers started working at my school and they're starting to dye their hair blonde, I said to them, if I dye my hair blonde, I will be bold. My hare gaan uitval van 'n skroes. But you know what? I've learned today, after 17 years, I don't see color in my school. I had to practice it first with myself. I had a lot of fights. And a lot of time I had children who don't understand me because I speak Afrikaans like a colored, because I grew up in Bonteville. But you know what? I was forced to stand up for myself and to tell those teachers, I'm a qualified teacher. My background is different, but my job is the same. I never bragged about my qualifications, but today I can tell you, I feel good about myself. We still have a lot of white teachers, but do you know what? The moment you start knowing the person, the human being, you don't see color. Whether it's black or white, I'm just going to make an example. When I look at our children that come, the foreign children, their color is so beautiful. I kiss them every time. I don't see color. What I'm trying to tell you today is that it's an inward thing. You need to own it, and you need to see the commonalities about the values and about whatever religion you are. You don't have to go to church. Whatever religion you are, that there are commonalities, and that's the values. That is just my experience.
We've forgotten how to love ourselves, and therefore we can't love other people. So a spiritual teacher once said, love your neighbor like you love yourself. We can't love ourselves, therefore we can't love our others, and we can't love our planet. And our planet is going to die in 50 years' time, according to David Attenborough, who I believe is very connected to the Earth, having studied it for 60 years of his life, and he's now 91. So self-love, that's what we have to spread around the world. Go, love.
Absolutely, because I think a part that I did omit is that in that moment of self-realization, and I said to you, humiliation, right? And I was alone by myself, but I experienced humiliation. The next step, and I'm grateful that I had a lot of support as I worked through that, is around forgiving myself. It's around when we discover our own prejudice, it's important that we can find a place to forgive ourselves for that prejudice. And then to look to see if there's any cleaning up we need to do in our circles where I've already exercised that prejudice, where I may already have caused damage, and to go and have those courageous conversations. So it's an ongoing process, because only when I engage someone else can I find a space that maybe there's something to forgive over there after I've forgiven over here. So thank you very much for raising that point. I think that's a very powerful thing, because the conversation that you're pointing to comes up when there's a problem. Yes? We're only going to notice the person as a repeated latecomer, and so we engage the conversation because now there's a need for some kind of discipline. Yes? So unfortunately, those are the times when we think we're engaging across cultures. In the workplace, it often gets reduced to that. And so sometimes we'll discover, okay, that's a reason, but then we think, because it's unfamiliar to us, we'll allow you 3 more strikes. We'll allow you 3 more times. Actually, nothing changes, right? Exactly. So you're right, there are structural barriers. But I do think, and this is why it's so important that as organizations, as communities, as schools, we are willing to engage a process of inclusion, of looking at, so how do we transcend this? It's not going to happen automatically. We need to be conscious about it. How do we have that a cross-section of our organization can sit in a circle and talk about their life experience as South Africans? A facilitated conversation so we can be primed for how to listen, so we can make sure there are agreements for how to maintain a safe and trusting space. But until we engage that process, it will always be that on the one hand, those structural things haven't changed, and they keep us misunderstanding each other. Because we easily then brand a whole group of people as having that type of work ethic. They come in late, they're lazy, they don't want to work. And so we don't transcend that. So we do need to engage consciously in having processes for inclusion within our organizations.
I think one of the things you said at the start, you said care enough to care enough about the end goal long before things happen. So one of the things that I'm hearing you say is, we know that there are structural issues. So long before the issue arises, can we talk about it? And that means you care enough, you feel strongly enough to deal with the issue long before it happens. And I think we're waiting for the thing first to happen, then we deal with it. So we know we have a problem, but we're not talking about it.
Hani, yeah, thanks for enlightening us for your presentation. There was a gentleman there mentioned something about loving ourselves and all of that. So, you know, some of the things that I see that we experience within the workplace is also like, you know, as the gentleman mentioned, like not loving each other, you know. So we find that, you know, sometimes people just work each other out of the workplace, like almost like it's nothing, you know, and they don't think of the repercussions, the consequences that it has on that person, on that person's mental state as well, on that person's family, because, I mean, we all work for ourselves and our families. I can't work for you and your family, and so you can't work for me and my family. So it's that kind of a thing that is happening within the corporate sector, within the working environment. Like a lot of people like is just dislike towards each other and working each other out and stuff. So that kind of a thing that I feel that, you know, we as people need to tell each other, you know, kind of come to terms with this whole thing and like link, you know, and, you know, get to, you know, understand, you know, how important this whole thing is of not embarking on these kind of ventures. But let me conclude by saying, as much as we are having this kind of workshop and topic, I'm looking as also at, as much as this is fundamental, to incorporate this within the educational space, basic education in terms of, I think development is fundamental, because I always feel like we're leaving the schools at the countryside. You know, those schools, they always like marginalized, you know, there's so little like attraction, or how should I put it, like, you know, we don't mention, there's so little of these, you know, these schools, we like, they're almost like at the periphery, you know, we're always focusing on these, which is important, the schools within the urban areas, in your gang-ridden communities, but the schools within the countryside, at the farms and those stuff, development, there's no computer facilities, it's chaotic, and like, I'm just thinking like, I just want to use this, my opportunity to kind of make this aware to you guys as well, that maybe with the Minister of Basic Education, when you guys are going to have your meetings or whatever, and like present this and make this alert about these things as well. Thank you. I've been too long now. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. Can I just ask, what age learners do you work with?
Foundation and intersect, so grade R to grade 7.
Okay, wow. So you said courage and curiosity are innate in young learners. Actually, in children up until the age of 4, curiosity is peaked at the age of 4. Do you know what's sad? By the age of 6, curiosity already started to decline. Why do you think that happens? This is what neuroscience is teaching us. This is what the research is showing. Why do you think that happens? What cause? No, before they even get to school.
We don't give an opportunity to explore. Give it to them there. Don't climb the tree, you're going to fall.
Yeah, you're right. We don't let them fall. We don't let them learn. In fact, let me put it to you this way. Our education system, and I'm not saying this to diss anybody, but our education system has been about learning bodies of work, not discovery. And so our children aren't learning to think. They're learning to remember. They're learning to imitate. To imitate is a natural human thing. And so the answer to your question is, who are the children imitating when they don't take responsibility? So when we start asking that question, we maybe need to ask, what are we modeling? Do we tell our children our faults? Do we sit down with our kids and say, what was challenging for me today? Where did I fail? How did I mess up? Not usually. And that's a big part of why they don't learn to step into the space. The other thing we need to ask is, do we celebrate when somebody steps in and owns up to something? Or do we punish them? Do we say, well, now you've said it, now we know it's true, now you're going to get the disciplinary action? Or do we celebrate that they actually step forward? So if our kids are growing up in a culture of fear, they are not going to learn to be candid.
Where there's permission to speak freely and not permission to say the right thing. And you encourage them to work through whatever the issue is themselves in an honest way, not now you're going to come in here and you're going to apologize to your friend for what you did, but how did we get here? How did your friend get hurt? Did you check what your friend meant before you slapped him? Or could it have been a mistake? Or could you have misinterpreted? If you allow the children to wind it back and work out how they got there in the first place, there's so much innate wisdom in them that they can resolve so much of it themselves without being led there. So if you create a safe space where you invite them to do the solving, then candor will grow naturally.
We talk about the children and the teachers being very involved with the children. But what I find that is not happening is the interaction with the parents. We are living in a society where our social ills is so, so messed up. Where parents are basically sending their children to school to get away, or just time away from the house, or there's a safe place for you to go to. But, of the teachers, how many of us actually do interact with the parents, discovering in terms of, if we're talking about that type of diversity, how different are those parents? Are they sitting at home? Are they drugs related? And those parents actually need someone to talk to. Just as that child is sent to school, and that child needs to interact with the teacher and different children. I also sense over this past year that parents also need to do that, especially within the communities that we live in, particularly the Cape Flats and the Crossroads and those areas.
Can I just say something else before I go to Zola? Thank you very much for that. I think it's quite important what you're saying, but I want to pair it with what the lady over there said. We also need to be willing to open conversations to have our learners engage a topic. For them to bring curiosity, for them to bring that discovery mode to the question. So they can discover, uncover, find that inner wisdom that they do naturally have. And then the second thing that I want to comment on is, I want us to be mindful of the pitfall of setting ourselves up as experts. Because when I have to role model everything, I may believe that means I first need to be perfect. Let's face it, we're not there. None of us. So we rather, I think, need to be candid about our imperfections. What are we struggling to develop in ourselves? and have those conversations, then we're inviting support. That degree of vulnerability as leaders is rare, but it's necessary for our learners to step up and say, it's okay for me to not pretend to be perfect. It's okay for me to have a struggle around honesty. You know, it's okay for me to have a struggle around my attendance. My son was recently, he's post-matric, he was doing a year-long course this year, and it's ended prematurely because last week he was kicked out of the school that he's at. And he was kicked out because he's actually had almost 40 days absenteeism. Shocking. Yes, I'm sure as teachers it's appalling, right? What kind of parent does he have? So here's the thing, when the school phoned me in the first term to tell me your son's repeatedly absent, I said to them, listen, my son's in a post-matric course. I'm not relating to my son as a school child anymore. If my son had gone on to university, instead of doing this course that he chose to do, he would be simply receiving the consequences of his actions. He will get a DP or he won't get a DP. He will get a test mark or he won't get a test mark. He will get results or he won't get results. No one will call me. I want my son to learn that's how the adult world works, right? They were offended by my response. They felt I was being that kind of parent who didn't want to be involved. So here's the distinction. I'm very involved in my son's life as my son. I'm no longer involved in going into an institution to deal with my son's life. And that distinction is important for me. So when my son came home that day, now no one from the school called me to tell me what had happened. My son, because the school now has no communication with me because they think I'm that parent. So my son came home, and when I saw his face, he said, listen, we need to sit down and talk. I need to tell you what happened today. And he started telling me, and he told me first a bit of drama. That was all of 10 minutes of drama, the last 10 minutes of the day. But he told me this bit of drama, and I listened, and I could hear he's in this power play with a very young teacher. Now he's 19 and a half. That half matters to him. Right? The young teacher, whenever he talks to me about this teacher, he says, he's 24. And I can hear, 4.5 years older than me, only. Right? He's not saying this. So he always does this. It's come up a few times. So this teacher of 24, I think, had had enough. Because the teacher was very clear that this 19-and-a-half-year-old was in a power play with him. Right? And so given that they'd already had a conversation about his 40-odd days of absence, and despite that my son had made a renewed commitment to be good and regular for the rest of the year, here he was 10 minutes before the end of the day, looking at his phone. And he was expelled. So he came home to discuss the injustice because the punishment didn't match the crime. Okay? There was a long drama in between. Why am I sharing this with you? The modeling that I'm talking about, the conversation I'm talking about, is me listening and not telling my son where he's right or wrong. Not telling him where the teacher was right or wrong. Just being in the conversation with him. And then when he was done, I held him. And I said to him, this has been a hard year for you. What are you getting to know about yourself? And you know what? I could feel him sag on me. And he said, I'm so glad you understand it's been a hard year. So I'm clear he's not finishing the year that we've paid for. It's not that there's no consequence. Because that's the problem. We've been taught there must be a consequence. And it must be worthy of the crime. Right? He's living the consequence. He will not get a diploma. He will not get a certificate. He will not write the exam. He's lost respect with his peers. He's certainly lost the respect of not just that teacher. All the other teachers are not going to see him there. He's got a lot to deal with. How he sits in that community is something he's dealing with. I don't have to point out anything to him. I don't have to point out I'm a better student than he was. Because I only dropped to 60%. I didn't get expelled. You see, and unfortunately we fall into that trap. We don't have to know the answers. We can just engage in the tough conversation and show compassion. You know, and in that space he said to me, I realize that that teacher thinks I'm cocky. And I said, I think you're right. I think that's exactly what your teacher thinks. And I think he felt he wanted to stand his ground. And I think you need to salute him for doing that. Because you've been trying him for 10 months almost. Right? So he had the insight he needed to have. But it happens in their own conversation. And this is what, if we think we must even role model perfectly, or not perfectly, however we think we are, consider we won't have the difficult conversations. And the learning happens in conversation. We create worlds through conversation. We create connection.
A conversation with the various role players about the importance of values in education. What I've come to appreciate is the fact that my colleagues, probably myself included, are not really ready and willing to engage in this conversation beyond the confines of the school environment. Some of my colleagues are not willing to engage with the type of a learner that comes to school ill-prepared. They probably know what their problems are, but they're not willing to engage. Engaging means finding out why did you come late to school, why are you not wearing your full school uniform, why are your books in the manner in which they are? Because by so asking such questions, one can discover a lot about what's happening in the lives of the learners out there. The colleague said something earlier on, the fact that she has now come to embrace the type of a learner that she finds in her school. Probably, I need to have a conversation with that colleague, because to me, that's the crux of the matter. For us to begin to appreciate the type of a learner that we have in our school. Because these children are crying out for love, for care, for understanding. Something that unfortunately some of us lack. Probably that's the reason why we are sitting with the kind of challenges that we have in our schools. If only we could care.
Oh.
If only we could care. Thank you.
Oh. Can I just say one last thing on that, Sarisa? So, sorry, I just want to point, because I want to join what you just said, Zola, to what this gentleman said over here about the rural schools. And you spoke about not having access to computers and all of these other things. And what I heard is there's a lack of investment in the school sitting on the periphery. But what I want you to consider is we're not anywhere in any of our schools investing enough in humanizing education. That's the part we're not investing in. And this is why this element of caring, we'd rather focus on the technical skill than the human element. Unfortunately, and again, no disrespect to anybody intended, not even our life orientation program is geared towards humanizing the classroom. And we need to ask ourselves, what would we do differently if we wanted a certain quality of human being to leave the school? Not how many A's, not how many passes, not how many 100%, a quality of human being that needs to leave the classroom after 12 years. What's that standard? What are the outcomes? What are the criteria? In other words, what are the shared values? Because that's what's going to make us a nation that's worth dealing with.